Hey guys, SimCoder here, and today we'll be finishing up the major parts of the Instagram clone app. We'll implement the last feature that we'll do during this series, which is a feed ordered by chronological order, and this feed will pick up on every single post that the users that we are following has and order them in a way where we can view them chronologically. So yeah, this will be the last one probably. We'll still launch a couple more videos to touch up some things that didn't work out that well. I hope you enjoy this one. Let's do it. If the video is going a little too slow for you, then feel free to change the speed of the video in the video settings. Okay, so first things first, we have to understand what we must do during this lesson. So coming into our database, this is what we did last lesson. We made it so that it is now possible to have following and unfollowing of users. So in the case of this user, if you go into users following, you'll see that we have the IDs of the users that this user is following. However, you don't have any more information. You don't have the name, you don't have the post that this user has made. So we must find a way in order to get it. And this is possible if after we get the following list, we get the user information by coming in here and fetching this information, and then fetching all of the posts that the user that we are following has made. And then we organize it chronologically. So we have to do some steps for that. Again, Firebase is probably not the best platform database for this, better yet, Firestore in this case, but it should do the trick and we should be able to do it nonetheless. So let's come into actions and let's start working on it. So the first thing that we have to do is to create a function which will get the user's information that we got from here. So in here we'll have a loop which will call on this function for each and every single user that it finds on snapshot. So let's do export function fetch user data. Better yet, let's say users because this isn't the current user. We pass along UID. Let's make this bigger. There we go. And then we open curly brackets. That's it. Now we are going to return, just like we did before, the dispatch and get state. I don't believe we have used the get state function yet, but I'll explain it in a second, as it is pretty straightforward. It simply gives you the state of the store, Redux store at the moment, so that we can get the users following, and with that we can do some cool stuff, which we'll do in a second. So now we are going to get the users. So now we are going to see if the UID which we are trying to get already exists within our reducer. And in our reducer, we currently just have the user.js. However, we want to create yet another one. And the reason why we want to create another one is because, this user.js is dedicated to the current user, and we want to have a more general one, which will contain all of the users that we currently have. So I made a copy of user, and I'm going to call it users.js. However, right now, we won't have a current user. We will have users. So this list will contain all of the users. And then we'll pass along yet another variable, which will be users loaded. And this one will be just a counter for how many users have loaded at the moment. Then const, it will be users instead of user. Remember that. And now we have to create the actions types, which will be, in this case, users state change. And let's say users data to make it more general. And then users posts state change. Okay, so that's it. We are going to copy each and every single one of them, paste them up top, not like this, and we can remove the last one, which is user following state change. We are obviously not going to use that. Then move it inside the constants, and I'm going to double up on two of them and simply paste them in here to make everything easier. Do the same thing for users data state change. So in here it will be users, and now instead of passing along a simple object, we are going to concat the object that is incoming to the current state of the list that we have in here. So in that case, it will be, we can open the brackets, 3 points, which means it will store whatever is already in there. Then we say state.users, comma, action user. And obviously this hasn't been created yet, but we'll finish up on the action in a second. So users, it will concat the user that comes in from the action, and that way we'll have the most updated array list. Okay. Now, in the case of this, we aren't going to worry about that at the moment. We are going to finish writing our action. So, whenever we fetch a user, we want to first see if the user currently exists within our users array, because we don't want to have duplicate entries for the same user. So for that, we simply say const found equals to get state. We make use of this variable in order to get the state of the Redux store, and we say user state. And this user state we haven't created yet. So going into index.js, we are going to add it in here. User state is going to be equal to users, and double up on the user and add another reducer, which is this one in here. So users. And now by doing that, in actions, in this action, we'll be able to access the user state. Then we say .users. We say .users because, let me come back in here, because we want to access this variable. .sum L open arrow function L.uid equals to UID. And what this function does is tries to see if an element with the UID equal to the UID that was passed along exists within this array. If it does, then found will be true. If it doesn't, then found will be false. Pretty straightforward. And now we say if found, then, or better yet, if not found, let me correct that. If not found, then that means that the user doesn't exist within our array, which means that we can actually go ahead and do a query to the database in order to fetch it. So now for this part, I'm going to go up top and grab what we wrote for the fetch user function, and I'm going to grab it all and drop it inside this if. It will be pretty much the same with the exception, and let's close that up, with the exception of this Firebase auth current user UID, which won't be this, it will be just UID. Okay? Then in here, we won't be dispatching right away, we will be getting the user. First we say let user equals to snapshot dot data, and we say that the user.uid will be equals to snapshot.id. That way we get the full object and we make sure that a new ID is connected to this object, otherwise it would be impossible to manage everything. Then instead of user state change, it will be users data state change, because remember right now we are going to make a call to this action and not the user.js action. Okay, so we must import it up top, And let's add the constant in here. And now going below, instead of current user, we are simply going to pass along user. And that way, whenever this reducer is called, it will update the current array with the user that's passed along and that we got from here. Okay, so now all that's left is to get the post's data. This is a bit more complicated. The reason being because everything is asynchronous, we must do some trickery in order to make sure it works. But for now, let's not worry about that and let's just write the code. And for this, I'm going to go again up top and get the fetch user posts because it is pretty much similar with some differences, some minor differences. The first one being UID, and I'm going to say instead of fetch user posts, we'll say fetch users following posts. Okay, so this function will be responsible for getting all of the users that the current user is following, and it is going to get their posts. Okay, and now in this patch we'll need the get state as well. So let's add it in here. Instead of Firebase auth current user UID, it is just UID. Apart from that, everything is the same in the query. We'll get the post for this user, and it will be in ascending order depending on the creation date. Okay, so now one part that's a bit different is that because this function is asynchronous, as I was saying, we lose the value of this UID after this query has been done running. So if you have the UID of the user 1 whenever we first make this call, and we are running this in a loop, so it is going from user 1 to user 2 to user 3, etc., then whenever we make the query for the user 1 and it is retrieved to us, the value of UID might be user 40 or something like that, because it is asynchronous. You make the call, but the rest of the code still runs. It just forgets that it is running this piece of code, and it waits for a response, but while it waits, it is in the backlog. So the code continues to run, even though it is waiting for something. So we must find a way in order to get the ID whenever we make this query, keeping in mind that we can trust in this UID to be the one that we want, or the one that's attached to the snapshot that we are getting. So the only way of getting this is, unfortunately, to look at the logs and see where it comes. And I looked at the logs of the snapshot, and I find out that if you do snapshot.query.path.segments and now say parentheses brackets 1, you'll get the UID of the user. And right now I'm not going to show you this, but I'll do a console log in here so that when we run the code, I can show you how everything looks and how we got this snapshot. And I'm actually going to also place the snapshot in here so that we then can study this and see that the UID is in fact in this path, and we can access it like this. Okay, so now that we have the user's ID, even though this variable is completely useless by the moment we reach the callback, we are now ready to get the user. So how we are going to do this is we are going to find the user with this UID that's in users, and we are going to attach the posts of the user to it. Then we are going to make a callback. We are going to make a call for this reducer of this action type, which will update the array list. With this updated user, we are not going to create another array list for that. And the reason being, it makes everything a lot easier and easier to use whenever we want to display posts. So we are going to make a call for this, and in here it will update the array users with the user along with the post. So it will be a big object containing everything. And for this, in order to find the user and return the object, I'm going to go up top and copy this found line that we wrote just moments ago. It isn't the same, but it is pretty similar. So instead of found, we are going to call it user, and everything is the same in here. However, instead of sum, which just returns true or false, we are going to say find. And by doing find, it will give you the user object that is inside that array, which corresponds to this constraint. All right, so now everything should be working. All that we have to do is make the callback, the dispatch, better yet. So we say users post state change, which will again trigger these, not this one, this case. We are going to remove the last one because it is not useful to us. And there we go. Now we must change this case in order to find the user that corresponds to the user that's incoming from the action and update it. This is pretty straightforward to do. So what we are going to do is, first of all, say users loaded equals to state dot users loaded plus 1. Because after we get the post, there's nothing else to load from that user, so we can increment these users loaded, just make sure everything is correct. Then we are going to say users, and now we say states.users.map user arrow function user.uid equals to action.uid. Now we say interrogation points, and this means if a user is found within these constraints, then we are going to update it. We then do open curly brackets, user, comma, posts, 2 points, action.posts. And this will make it so that it will attach the posts array that we got from our query to the user object that matches these restraints. However, if no user is found, we are simply going to return user, and this will give you make it so that the user stays the same and without any changes whatsoever. Okay, save that. There we go. However, we are going to also add a UID in here so that we know within the reducer which user is making this call. And we are going to update the object posts to contain also the user. This way we'll be able to access the post data within our list, because remember, we are going to organize it chronologically, and we want to display the name associated with each and every single post. So by doing this, we'll be able to access everything without any problems. It will make for a bigger object and an array of objects, but it makes it truly simpler to use. However, if we come back into index.js, we see that nothing is calling on this fetch users data. So we must call this somewhere, and that somewhere will be inside fetch user following. So in fetch user following, we are going to do a really simple loop below this dispatch. So we say for let I equals to 0, y smaller than following dot length I++. So we are going to use this loop in order to go through each and every single user that the current user is following and calling this function accordingly for each and every single user. So in order to call a function in Redux and how we usually do it is we dispatch it. So we dispatch fetch, and I'm going to grab it here, fetch users data, and we are going to pass along the current iteration user that we are currently at. So following open brackets, I. And that way we'll dispatch the array to user following state change, and then we'll make a dispatch for each and every single user in order to start the query process and to get everything. So then it runs this function for each and every single user, but then we are also not calling on fetch users following posts. So that's what we are going to do right now. We are simply going to go into fetch users data, go below this dispatch, because remember, you can have multiple dispatches. This isn't a return or anything like that. It doesn't stop the function. So we dispatch fetch users following posts with the user.id that we are currently querying, and that way it will start, continue the process in order to get the fetch user posts. So I'm going to scatter around some console logs, and I'm going to run it and see what happens. Okay, so I've added a couple of console logs in the fetch users following posts. So I'm returning the posts of the user and a console log of the get state, which will return the entire state to us at the final moment. So coming back in here, I'm going to reload, and let's make it like this, like that, okay? And we get a bunch of things in our log. However, the most important one is the last one, as it is the last iteration and the last query that we do. So it will contain the most updated state for us. If we jump back in here, we'll see that we get the user state and the user state. In this case, we are interested in the user state. And we see that we have users loaded equals to 3, which is good, because if we go into our into my Firestore console dashboard, and go into following, I'm currently logged in with this user, and we get 3 users. And if we open up the users array, we'll see that the IDs match to the ones that we have in our database. Okay, so that's great. And if we open up the first user, we see that we get the email, the name, the UID, and we get the posts array. However, it is empty, and this is because this user doesn't have any posts made. The same thing for the user in the second position, but the user in the third position contains posts, and it contains all of the objects the post objects that the user has to their name. If you go into a post, then we see that it contains the user object again. So it might seem a bit redundant, and it kind of is, but it makes it so much easier to deal with in the front end that I believe it is something that we should do, just make things a bit more easy when it comes to displaying the post with the name and the email of the user if we wanted to, or the profile's image, for example. So that's it. It is working. It is getting everything. Now all that's left is to display those images to the user. So let's do it. Okay, so here we are in the feed.js, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to go into profile. I'm going to grab all of the contents that are inside here, and I'm going to paste them in here. I'm doing this because it is pretty similar to what we are going to do right now. So I'm going to quickly change the name of profile to feed. Going below, change profile to feed yet again. And I'm going to clear up all of the things that are related just to the profile, which is this view, for example. So clear that, clear these functions, and I'm going to clear the if on effect. I'm going to clear this array and everything that's inside it. Because we are going to use the use effect, but in a slightly different manner. Okay, so the first thing that we need is to go into the map state to props, and we are going to add a couple of new variables that we need. We are going to remove posts because we don't need it. We do, however, need the users, which are contained inside store user states dot users. We'll also need users loaded. And we need this variable in order to figure out if every single user has loaded, and only then can we start displaying images. Otherwise, the chronological order can be completely made useless and wrong. So this is a way where of how we can do it. You delay a bit the loading time, but for now it is more than enough, so let's go with it. There's an array in here, and in here it is fit, not whatever we had before. Okay, so there we go. Now we can gain access to everything that we need. Up top, we are going to go inside use effects, and now instead of what will trigger reload on the use effects and what will trigger the ordering of the posts will be the props dot users loaded. Okay, so there we go. Now the variables that we want are just one, basically. We want a list of the posts that we want to show, and for that I'm going to call it posts and set posts. The state will be an empty array in the beginning, as usual, so no need to worry about that at the moment. So in the use effect, again, it will be called onload, and whenever this prop changes, we are going to say let posts equals to an empty array. This will be the array that will update this variable up top whenever the loading is done. Now we say if users loaded, and in this case it will be props dot users loaded equal to props dot following dot length, then open curly brackets, and we'll do for let I equals to 0 to I smaller than props following dot length I plus plus, open curly brackets yet again. And right now we are going to try to find the user like we did in our index.js, in our actions. Go in here and simply grab this line. So const users, get state user state, users find, whatever. It will be slightly different, but it gets most of it right. So instead of get state user state, it will be props, because remember this is passed along inside our props. And instead of UID in here, it will be props.following open brackets I. Okay, so after this, we are going to check if the user exists and isn't undefined. For that, simply say user, and now exclamation point equal, which means different, obviously, undefined. Then we are going to say that posts is equal to open curly brackets, 3 points posts, comma user dot posts, and it should have the 3 points as well. Okay, so these will concat the user's posts, the current user's posts in this iteration, to our posts variable up top, and then after everything has been concocted, then we can order all of the posts by the timestamp. And that's what we are going to do right now. So after the loop has been completed, we'll say posts.sort function, and we will pass along X and Y, which is the current and the next post. You can think of it like that. And we'll open curly brackets. And we'll say that the restraint for ordering these posts array is the x dot creation to be smaller than y dot creation. Okay, and this will order and this isn't our function, I'm sorry about that. This will order the array for us, picking up, because if x dot creation is bigger than y dot creation, then this return will be positive. And if it is a contrary, then it will be negative and it will order it accordingly. Okay, so now we get the posts ordered. All that's left is say set posts. And there we go. Now everything is done. We have our ordered list. Now all that's left is to go into our view and change things according to what we have. So the number of columns will be 1, the data will be posts. Everything else will be left the same. However, we'll add a text tag in here, which will contain the post's creator's name. And for that, we say item.user.name. There we go. We'll have to add a style in here as well. So let's add it up in here. And we'll simply say container, which has flex equal to 1. I'm not going to worry about the front end at the moment. I just want to see this working. So that's it. Now it should be all fine. It is ordering the posts array and it is doing everything that it should. I hope so. So I'm going to quickly run it on my device and see how it looks. Okay, so here we are, and I made a couple of errors that we must correct. The first one is that I called this user loaded in the users.js, and it must be users loaded. That's what I wanted it to be called. So yeah, if we come back in here, it wasn't loading because it wasn't able to find the users loaded. The next part that was wrong, and let me just go a bit back, is that I forgot to remove this if user equals to null that we needed in the profile.js, but we don't need now. So we can go ahead and remove it. Okay, apart from that, it is working. And if I go into my phone, you can see that I get a feed with the 2 posts that the only user that I was following has. In this case, it is dogs. I wasn't the one that uploaded this. It was one of you guys. But yeah, it is working as it should be. The posts are all in chronological order. So yeah, everything is done. Now, in the next lesson, we'll take care of lining up the edges. We are going to make sure Redux works fine, because right now, if you log out and log in with another user, then the store will still have everything corresponding to the last user, and so it will work not as smoothly as it should be. So we'll handle that, and we'll handle some other quirks that the app has at the moment. If you have any suggestions for the current state of the app, then please do let me know. I'll try to implement them in the next lesson, and I'll try to do my best in order to make sure the app fits your needs. So if you enjoyed this series, please do leave a like and subscribe. This helps you to not miss any single video that comes out in the future. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you again tomorrow, and ciao!